When you're working with gas welding and cutting operations, there are a number of safety procedures to follow. Each company is responsible for developing specific guidelines, policies, and procedures, as a short video training program cannot list all the potential hazards or safety elements. This program is simply a guideline of basic safety measures designed as safety awareness, but it's not a complete or comprehensive program. Let's begin with the area used for such operations. The welding or cutting area must be protected against fire hazards posed by combustible and flammable materials. Combustibles must be located at least 35 feet from the worksite. If this is not possible, combustibles must be protected with flame-proof covers, or metal, or other fireproof shielding. Floors on which combustible materials such as paper clippings, wood shavings, or textile fibers accumulate must be swept clean for a radius of 35 feet. Keep in mind that welding temperatures are extremely high, and welding on metal can create heat transfer from the metal part to combustible materials located nearby. Welding operations have caused a high number of major fires. Due to the potential for fires, explosions, and health hazards, cutting or welding must be carefully controlled. Never weld or cut in the presence of mixtures of flammable gases, vapors, liquids, or dusts with air, or inside improperly cleaned tanks or equipment which have previously contained such material. Never weld or cut near large quantities of exposed, readily ignitable materials such as bulk sulfur, baled paper, or cotton. Never weld or cut near vapor degreasing operations or spray booths due to the potential fire hazards. Some chemicals can decompose under the ultraviolet radiation of the welding-cutting operation and become quite dangerous. Always weld and cut only in those areas authorized by management. Protection in the form of curtains or enclosures is required when other persons could be harmed by the effects of the flying slag or eye hazards. Most gas welding and cutting operations used compressed gas cylinders, and there are some important procedures to follow when using these cylinders. All cylinders stored inside must be located in a well-protected, well-ventilated, dry location. They must be at least 20 feet from highly combustible materials, sparks, open flames, excessive heat, and away from elevators, stairs, or gangways. When cylinders are not connected for use, valve protection caps must be in place unless the cylinder is not designed to accept a cap. Stored oxygen cylinders must be separated from stored fuel cylinders or combustible materials, especially oil or grease, by at least 20 feet or by a non-combustible barrier. This barrier must be at least 5 feet high and have a fire resistance rating of 1/2 hour. All cylinders must be legibly marked to identify their contents. Cylinders connected for use must be lashed or chained to prevent them from falling over. Be careful that cylinders are not placed so as to become a part of an electrical circuit. Mark empty tanks MT, close the valves, and replace valve caps securely. Let's take a look at the valve and regulator settings. The regulator is a delicate piece of equipment and must be handled carefully at all times. Pipe wrenches or pliers must not be used for attaching regulators to cylinders. Use an end wrench of proper size. Leave the valve wrench on the acetylene cylinder whenever the valves are open. This permits emergency shutoff of the gas. Hammers or wrenches must not be used to open or close cylinder valves that are fitted with hand wheels. If a regulator creeps, have it repaired immediately. Creeping of a regulator is indicated by a gradual increase in pressure after the torch valves are closed. Hoses showing leaks, burns, or worn places must be replaced or repaired. Hoses should be color-coded to avoid accidental mixing of the gases. You can see in this graphic the green hose is for oxygen, and it has a right-hand thread. The red hose is acetylene and has a left-hand thread. Check hose connections for proper threading. Standard hose connections are threaded right-hand for oxygen and left-hand for acetylene or other fuel gases. The obvious purpose is to keep them from getting mixed up. Periodically inspect the hoses and check them for leaks. Test the hose for leaks by immersing it under normal working pressure in water or by using soapy water. Never try to repair hoses with tape. When repairing hoses, use only approved bronze or brass fittings. Copper fittings must never be used on acetylene cylinders. Under certain conditions, the acetylene might react with the copper to produce an explosive compound. Never use oil, grease, or other petroleum products on any torch or regulator. Oil and grease, in the presence of oxygen, may burn with explosive force if they become ignited. When hooking up the cylinders, point the cylinder outlet away from each other. This helps reduce improper mixture in case of leaks. Valves malfunction periodically and can be quite hazardous. To prevent injury from malfunctioning valves, never face a gauge while opening the cylinder valve. Stand to one side. When lighting your welding or cutting torch, there are certain precautions and procedures. First, purge the hoses. Open the valve on the acetylene cylinder. This should never be opened more than 1 1/2 turns, and 3/4 of a turn is preferable. Open the acetylene torch valve 1/4 turn. Adjust the acetylene to working pressure, which is less than 15 pounds per square inch gauge or 30 pounds per square inch absolute. Close the acetylene torch valve. Next, slowly open the oxygen cylinder valve all the way. Open the oxygen torch valve 1/2 turn. Adjust the oxygen working pressure with the gas regulator screw. Turn off the oxygen torch valve. Next, we have the final steps of actually lighting the torch. Don't use matches. Use a friction lighter to light the blowpipe. Reopen the acetylene torch valve 1/4 turn and light the gas with a friction lighter. Open the oxygen valve 1/4 turn and adjust the flame. Now you can adjust the acetylene working pressure with the blowpipe lighted. When shutting off the torch, close the torch valves. Acetylene first, then the oxygen. Close the cylinder valves again. Acetylene first, then the oxygen cylinder. Open both torch valves to release the pressure inside the hoses. Shut off the regulator adjusting handle until you no longer feel any spring tension. Close the torch valves. This procedure reduces the possibility of regulator fires when the oxygen cylinder valve is open again. It will also prevent leaks of acetylene or oxygen while the equipment is not in use. A leak could cause a serious fire. Experienced welders understand the term cracking a cylinder. This is simply opening the cylinder valve slightly and then closing it to remove any potential dust or debris inside the valve. Cracking is accomplished before installing regulators. When leaving the area, don't leave pressure in the hoses. Shut off the oxygen and acetylene at the cylinder. Never use a hard, sharp tool for cleaning tips, except where such tools may be specifically recommended by or supplied by the tip manufacturer. Use appropriate tip cleaners. Naturally, the material you're welding or cutting must be approved for such use. No welding or cutting should be performed on used drums, barrels, tanks, or other containers until they have been cleaned thoroughly, eliminating all flammable materials and all substances such as greases, tars, or acids which might produce flammable or toxic vapors when heated. Use a cleansing agent appropriate for the gas or liquid which was in the container. Clean the container a second time with either water or steam. All hollow spaces, cavities, or containers should be vented to permit the escape of air or gases before preheating, cutting, or welding. Without listing all the health hazards, let's just review a few of the hazards that can occur in the welding-cutting operations. Acetylene is one of the most commonly used fuels for gas welding, cutting, and brazing. It is capable of displacing oxygen from the atmosphere, reducing it to a level below that required by your body. The major hazard is the explosion potential. Acetylene becomes unstable at excessive pressures, so do not pressurize it above 15 psig or 30 psia. Chromium is the primary alloying agent in stainless steel. Chromium compounds are strong oxidizing agents and are extremely toxic and irritating to the skin, eyes, and mucous membranes. Although welding under normal operations would not be expected to produce hazardous concentrations of chromium compounds, welding of stainless steel should be carried out in well-ventilated areas. Fluoride compounds are found in the coating of several types of fluxes used in welding. Exposure to these fluxes may irritate the eyes, nose, and throat. Exposure to fluoride dusts and fumes has also produced skin rashes. Zinc is used in large quantities in the manufacture of brass, galvanized metals, and various other alloys. Exposure to these fumes is known to cause metal fume fever, with symptoms similar to those of common influenza. The most effective measure of reducing exposure to fumes is to work in a well-ventilated area. Where this is not possible, portable ventilation systems can be used to extract welding fumes from your breathing zone. Some of the physical agents that can be harmful to welders is ultraviolet radiation when using arc welding. Skin exposure to ultraviolet radiation can result in severe burns. UV radiation can also damage the lens of the eye. Infrared radiation produced by the electric arc and other flame-cutting equipment may heat the skin surface and the tissues immediately below the skin surface. Use protective clothing to prevent this type of hazard. Intense visible light exposure to the eye can produce adaptation, pupillary reflex, and shading of the eyes. Such actions are protective mechanisms to prevent excessive light from being focused on the retina. This is particularly true in arc welding operations. Always use proper eye protection and never allow anyone to watch arc welding without proper eye protection. There are a variety of specially designed eye protection for each type of welding operation. Be sure you know what specific type eye protection is used for each operation. If you're not sure, ask your supervisor or the equipment manufacturer for specific information. Sparks may lodge in rolled-up sleeves, pockets, or cuffs. Sleeves and collars must be kept buttoned, and pockets should be removed from the front of clothing. The legs of trousers or coveralls should not be rolled up on the outside. There are literally hundreds of different rules, regulations, and procedures to follow in welding operations. We've only touched on a few. Special eye protection, respiratory protection, hearing protection, valves, gauges, hoses, fittings. All the things you need to know to make your job safer and healthier. If you're not sure about something, ask your supervisor. You may be quite familiar with the equipment and personal protection required, but you may be welding or cutting a material that's unfamiliar to you. Take a minute to find out what this material is made of and what hazards it may pose to you and others. Welding and cutting is a safe operation if you follow the rules. If you try to take shortcuts or not follow proper procedures, it could become a hazardous job. Take time for safety and health because you're worth it. Thank you.